The council hall smelled of spilled wine, burning wax, and the sweat of wolves who considered themselves too important to notice the ground beneath their feet. Ivy walked through that door the way she had walked into nearly every space in her life, unannounced, unescorted, and without the right to occupy more room than strictly necessary. The dress she wore was simple linen, the color of faded sand, sewn by the hands of old Marin, the only woman who still spoke her name with any warmth. There were no embroideries, no stones, but there was pride in that fabric, and Ivy knew it. She wore it as though it were silk. The hall was full. It was the night of recognition, the ritual held once per season to formalize bonds, dissolve old ties, and present those who carried wolves' children to the pack that owed them protection. It was an ancient law, one of the few that still protected women like her. Ivy placed one hand over her belly and breathed deeply. 7 months. Nearly 8. The baby shifted. A slow, firm movement, as if it too understood that this night mattered. She searched the hall for Doran. He was there. Of course he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the crest of the gray pack embroidered in silver on his dark cloak. He was laughing with 2 other wolves near the fireplace, cup in hand, completely at ease in the space the world had always reserved for men like him. Doran had been born with status. He had grown up knowing the world would bow its neck to him before it even asked his name. When his eyes found hers across the hall, something crossed his face, too fast to read clearly. Discomfort, perhaps, or the recognition of a debt he would rather not pay. Ivy did not look away. She had come here by right. Doran had promised, not in ceremony, not before formal witnesses, but he had promised with the hoarse voice of the early hours, with his hands cradling her face, that he would acknowledge the child, that he would acknowledge her, that before the council, before the pack, before whatever eyes weighed upon them, he would not pretend it had never happened. She had believed him. That was the part that hurt most, not the loneliness of the months that followed, not the closed doors, the whispers, the women who crossed to the other side of the market so they wouldn't have to pass by her. What hurt was having believed. Councillor Aldrich called the session to order with 3 strikes of his staff against the stone floor. The sound echoed off the walls, and the hall fell silent in waves, like disturbed water returning to calm. "The night of recognition is open," he announced, his voice the rough rasp of a man who had exercised authority long enough to no longer need to raise it. "Those who carry requests of bond, present yourselves to the center of the hall." Ivy stepped forward. She felt the stares before she saw them. Heavy, curious, some openly hostile. She was known here. Or rather, what was said about her was known. Daughter of a packless wolf. Raised outside the bloodlines, without a mark, without a clan, without anything that world considered real. Except the child she carried. She reached the center and stood, one hand still resting on her belly, shoulders straight. "I am Ivy," she said. "I come to invoke the right of recognition for the child I carry. The father is Doran, of the Grey Pack." The silence that followed had texture. She could feel it against her skin. Aldrich lifted his eyes to Doran. The entire hall lifted its eyes to Doran. He set his cup down slowly. Turned with a calm Ivy recognized as rehearsed. Someone had spoken with him beforehand. Someone had prepared that moment with surgical precision so the damage would be minimal for him and irreversible for her. "I know Ivy," Doran said. His voice was even, almost gentle, which was worse than anger. "And I am sorry she finds herself here, in this situation. But I cannot confirm what she claims. The world did not collapse. It was too small to collapse. It simply grew quieter." Ivy felt something harden at the center of her chest. Not surprise, not entirely. It was the confirmation of something she had tried, with every ounce of her strength, not to know. cannot confirm," she repeated, and her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "Or will not." "Ivy," he said, and there was a warning in that name. "This child carries Greypack blood," she said. "You know that." "What I know," Doran replied. And now there was something cold there, something calculated, "is that I cannot acknowledge a child on the word alone of a woman without a pack, without a mark, and without a witness of bond." He paused. "That is the law. It was the law. That was the cruelty of it. It was completely, perfectly, deliberately the law." Aldrich did not defend her. None of the other counselors spoke. The women near the columns looked away. Ivy stood in that center for a moment that lasted longer than any moment had the right to last. She felt the weight of the child. She felt Marin's linen against her skin. She felt every gaze in the hall as a physical pressure. And then she decided she would not stay there to be watched. She turned her back on Doran with all the slowness she could summon, as though hurry were simply something she did not possess. She walked toward the exit with her head held high, even as the floor beneath her felt unsteady, even as something very close to despair tried to rise through her throat. She did not reach the door. The first pain arrived without warning, a contraction so brutal she had to grip the side of a column to keep her knees from buckling. The air left her lungs in a sound she had not intended to make. Then came another, and another. "No," she said in a low voice, to herself, to the child, to the entire universe. "Not yet." But the body did not negotiate. She slid slowly down the column to the cold stone floor, her fingers white from gripping the marble. The hall that had been silent became more silent still, the kind of silence that happens when people collectively decide not to get involved. No one moved. Doran looked at her from where he stood. She saw it, saw that he looked at her, and saw that he did not take a single step. "Someone," she said, and the word came out broken between one breath and the next. "Someone, please." Nothing. The torches on the walls kept burning. The wine on the tables stayed red. The world kept turning with complete indifference to the woman on the cold stone floor who needed help. And then the hall doors opened. They did not bang. They were not pushed with force or drama. They simply opened, as if the hinges knew they should yield. And the man who entered did not need to announce who he was, because the entire hall announced it with their bodies. Shoulders that pulled back, heads that lowered, space that opened before him like divided water. Ivy did not know his name, but she knew, with the instinctive clarity that wolves carry in their blood, exactly what he was. Tall, taller than Doran, broader, with the kind of stillness in his movements that did not come from timidity, but from absolute certainty that nothing in that hall could threaten him. The cloak he wore was dark, no visible crest, but there was something in the quality of the fabric, in the weight of his presence, in the two men who entered just behind him, equally imposing, equally silent, that said everything without needing words. He stopped. He looked at the hall. He looked at Aldrich. He looked at Doran. And then he looked at Ivy on the floor. And she was the only thing in the hall that he seemed to truly see. He crossed the distance between them without hesitation, without consulting anyone, without asking permission from any of the stiffened authorities around him. He knelt on the cold stone before her, a king kneeling, and no one in the hall seemed capable of breathing properly at the sight of it. And the voice that came from him was low, direct, and completely free of pity. "I am here," he said. "You are not alone." Ivy looked at that unfamiliar face and felt, for the first time that night, something other than cold. "Who are you?" she managed to say. "Evander," he answered simply, as though the name needed nothing else to hold itself up. And from the absolute silence that fell over the hall, She understood that it didn't. Evander did not wait for permission. He had never been the kind of man who did. He shifted his position on the cold stone, one knee still grounded, and looked at Ivy with eyes that assessed without invading. Dark, steady, the color of deep forest before a storm. There was no performance in the way he moved, no calculation. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at something that matters, and then he acted accordingly. "Can you stand?" he asked. Another contraction rolled through her before she could answer. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her fingers gripped the base of the column harder. "Not right now," she admitted through her teeth. Something shifted in his jaw. He turned his head slightly, and the two men who had entered with him were already moving before he said a word. The taller of the two, broad as a wall, with a jaw that looked carved from the same stone as the floor, was already removing his outer cloak. The other, leaner and quicker, with the restless eyes of someone who found most situations quietly amusing, had already turned to face the frozen hall with an expression that managed to be both pleasant and deeply unsettling at the same time. "Someone in this room," the lean one said, his voice carrying the effortless volume of a man accustomed to being heard, "must know something about bringing a child into the world." He let his gaze travel slowly across the assembled wolves, counselors, and noble-born witnesses. "I would strongly suggest that person make themselves known. Now. Before my patients find somewhere else to be." No one moved for exactly 2 seconds. Then a woman near the back wall stepped forward. She was older, gray-streaked, with the practical hands of someone who had spent her life being useful, rather than decorative. She pushed through the crowd without apology and knelt beside Ivy without looking at anyone else. "I am Berta," she said quietly. "I have helped with births before. Let me see." Ivy, who had spent the last several minutes trying to hold herself together through sheer willpower, felt something loosen in her chest at the sound of a woman's voice that did not carry judgment in it. "Thank you," she whispered. Evander rose to his full height. He turned to face the hall, and the shift in the room was immediate and physical, like the moment before thunder. A pressure in the air, a collective intake of breath. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Which of you," he said, "knew this woman was on the floor and chose to do nothing?" The silence was answer enough. His eyes moved to Doran. Doran, to his credit, did not look away. He lifted his chin with the particular expression of a man who has convinced himself that composure and innocence are the same thing. "This is a council matter," Doran said. "I have no legal obligation to—" "I did not ask about obligation," Evander said. 3 words, quiet as stone. And Doran stopped speaking as though his voice had simply been removed from him. Ivy watched this from the floor, one hand gripping Berta's arm through another wave of pain, and felt something strange move through her that was not quite comfort and not quite wonder. It was closer to disorientation, the feeling of a world rearranging itself around a fixed point she hadn't known existed until just now. "We need to move her," Berta said, looking up at Evander. "Somewhere warmer, with proper light." "The east corridor," said the broad one, who had said nothing until this moment. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that did not waste itself on unnecessary sounds. "There are rooms prepared." Evander nodded once. He looked at Ivy then, and there was a question in it. Not asking if she was frightened, not asking if she trusted him, but something simpler and more direct than either of those things. He was asking if she would allow it. She held his gaze for a moment. The pain was still coming in waves, her body doing what bodies do without consulting the mind, but beneath it there was something clear. She had walked into this hall alone and been left on its floor by every person in it, except the ones who had arrived in the last 4 minutes. "Yes," she said. "She." He lifted her with the kind of careful precision that comes not from delicacy, but from awareness. as though he had already calculated exactly how to do it without causing her more pain, without jostling the child, without making her feel like a burden being managed. She was not small, and he made her feel weightless anyway. The hall parted for them. Of course it did. As they moved through it, Ivy became aware of something she hadn't had the capacity to notice before. The smell of him. Clean and dark, like rain against pine bark. Like cold stone and something deeper underneath it. Something warm and ancient that her blood recognized before her mind caught up. She had heard wolves speak of scent recognition her whole life, and had always half believed it was something embellished in the telling. She believed it now. The east corridor was quieter, the torches here burning lower and more steadily, the stone walls holding a faint warmth from the chimneys behind them. Berta directed them to a room with a wide cot, blankets that smelled of cedar, and a low fire that someone must have kept burning for guests. The lean man disappeared and returned in minutes with hot water, cloth, and a focused efficiency that sat oddly with his earlier easy expression. "His name is Corvin," Evander said quietly, setting her down with the same careful precision he had used to lift her. "And the other is Reed. They will not leave this corridor." "You don't have to stay," Ivy said. The words came out before she had decided to say them. A reflex, perhaps, the habit of not assuming she was worth anyone's time. Evander looked at her steadily. "I know," he said, and he stayed. He moved to the far side of the room, giving Berta the space to work, and stood with his back against the wall and his arms loose at his sides, not watching with the kind of attention that intrudes. Just present, the way a solid wall is present, without demand, without performance, simply there. Ivy focused on Berta's instructions, on her own breathing, on the ancient and extraordinary work her body was doing without her permission. The contractions came harder and closer. Time folded in on itself, became nothing but breath and pressure and the low, steady sound of Berta's voice guiding her through it. At some point during those hours, between one wave of pain and the next, Ivy turned her head and found Evander exactly where he had been. Still, watching the fire rather than her now, giving her privacy in the only way that was available in that small room. His profile was sharp in the firelight. There was something exhausted in it, she realized. Not physically, but the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes of people who carry things they never put down. She wondered what he carried. She wondered why he was here, in that council hall, on this night of all nights. She wondered what business an Alpha King had in a regional council session, and why he had walked through those doors at exactly the moment he had. She did not ask. Not then. Then came the moment. The final, consuming, impossible moment that every woman who has ever brought a child into the world knows. When the body gathers every last resource it possesses and commits completely, and the world narrows to a single point, and then a sound, small, furious, and absolutely alive. Berta laughed, low and warm. "A girl," she said. "Strong lungs, strong everything." Ivy was shaking. She didn't remember starting to shake. Berta placed the child against her chest, warm and squirming and impossibly real, and Ivy pressed her lips to the top of that small head and held on. She heard a sound from across the room. Evander had turned from the fire. He was looking at her, not at the child, at her. And his expression had shifted into something that she had no name for yet. Something that was not pity, and not wonder exactly, but lived somewhere between them in territory that felt like recognition. Like he was looking at something he had been waiting to see for a very long time. The night deepened around them. Berta cleaned the child with practiced hands, wrapped her in a length of cedar-scented wool, and settled her back against Ivy's chest, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done this many times, and never once found it ordinary. The baby had stopped crying by then, her small face scrunched and searching, already learning the world through smell the way wolves always did first. Ivy couldn't stop looking at her. She had known, in the abstract way that all mothers know before the moment arrives, that she would love this child. She had not known it would feel like this, like something being completed that she hadn't realized was incomplete. "She needs a name," Berta said softly, gathering the used cloths. "I know," Ivy said. "I've had one ready for a long time." She hadn't said it aloud to anyone yet. She had kept it close, private, the way you keep a flame cupped between your palms in the wind. "Seren?" she said. The name settled into the room like something that had always belonged there. Evander, still standing at the far wall, said nothing, but she heard the quiet shift of his weight, the smallest acknowledgement. Berta left them not long after, promising to return in the morning with food and a proper examination. Corvin, the lean one with the watchful eyes, appeared briefly in the doorway to confirm that the corridor was quiet and that no one from the council had been foolish enough to approach. He delivered this information with the mild tone of someone reporting the weather and disappeared again before Ivy could thank him. Reed said nothing, as appeared to be his custom. And then it was just the three of them, Ivy, Seren, and the man who had no reason to still be in that room. "You should sleep," Evander said. It was not a command. It was simply a statement of fact delivered by someone who had been watching her body fight exhaustion for hours and understood what it needed. "I will," she said. "Soon." She looked down at Seren, who had found a fierce and single-minded interest in the fabric of Ivy's sleeve. The child's fingers were extraordinary, impossibly small, curled with complete conviction around the linen. "Why were you there tonight?" Ivy asked. She kept her voice low, not wanting to disturb Seren, or perhaps not wanting to disturb the fragile quiet of the room. "In the council hall. It's a regional session. Alpha Kings don't attend regional council sessions." A pause. "No," he agreed. "They don't." "Then why?" He moved from the wall then, not toward her, but to the chair beside the fire, and sat with the careful deliberateness of a large man in a small space. The firelight caught the angles of his face, the straight line of his nose, the set of his mouth, the shadows under his eyes that confirmed what she had noticed earlier. He was tired. Not in the way of one night's missed sleep, but in the accumulated way of someone who had been standing watch over something for a very long time. "There were reports," he said slowly, "of irregularities in the way this council has been handling recognition requests. Women being turned away. Bonds being dissolved without proper cause." He paused. "I came to observe." "And did you?" she said. "Observe?" Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "I observed enough," he said. Ivy looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back down at Seren. "He was going to let her be born with nothing," she said. The words came out flat, not dramatic, just true. No pack, no protection, no name in any record. She would have grown up the way I did. She exhaled. "I wasn't going to let that happen." "I know," he said. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what it costs to walk into a room like that and stand in the center of it alone." He watched her steadily. Not many people can do it. Most break before they reach the middle. Ivy said nothing to that. There wasn't much to say. She had not felt brave tonight. She had felt terrified and determined in equal measure, which was perhaps the same thing with different lighting. "Doran," she said after a moment, "will the council do anything?" Evander's jaw tightened slightly. "That depends on what you want to happen. I want Seren recognized," she said immediately. No hesitation. Officially, in the record. I don't want anything from him. I don't want his name spoken in this room or near my daughter again. But she deserves to exist in the record, with her bloodline documented, so that no one can ever question who she is. That can be arranged, he said. Through the regional council? Through me, he said simply. The weight of those two words sat in the air between them. Through me. Through the authority that walked into rooms and parted them like water. Through whatever power it was that made Aldrich stiffen, and Doran go quiet, and an entire hall full of wolves remember how to hold their breath. Ivy studied him. Why would you do that? She asked. You don't know me. You have no obligation here. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. When I walked into that hall, he said, and saw you on that floor. He paused, and something in the pause felt carefully chosen. I smelled something I have not smelled in a very long time. Ivy frowned slightly. I don't understand. You will, he said. And then, as if he had already said more than he intended, he rose from the chair. Sleep. I will be outside. You don't have to guard the door. I know, he said, for the third time that night. And she understood again that knowing and choosing were different things entirely for this man. He knew he didn't have to. He was choosing to anyway. The distinction mattered to him in a way she couldn't fully read yet, but felt the shape of, the way you feel the shape of a room before your eyes adjust to the dark. She slept. She hadn't expected to. Not so quickly. Not so deeply. But the exhaustion took her almost the moment Seren settled against her shoulder and the fire kept burning, and somewhere on the other side of the door there was a presence that her blood, apparently, had decided to trust even before her mind had caught up. She dreamed of a forest she had never been to. Old trees, enormous and dark, with roots that went so deep into the earth that the ground above them felt permanent. A wolf moved between them, large, dark, unhurried. It did not look at her. It simply moved through the trees, as though it belonged there. As though it had always belonged there. As though she did too. She woke before dawn to the sound of voices in the corridor. Low, careful, the kind of exchange meant not to carry. Seren was still sleeping, her small chest rising and falling with a steadiness that made something loosen in Ivy's ribs every time she noticed it. She sat up slowly, listening. Corvin's voice, then Reed's, then Evander's, quieter than both, and beneath the quietness something that had hardened overnight. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the shape of the conversation. The tight, controlled cadence of men discussing something that had made them angry and were choosing not to be loud about it. Then a fourth voice. She recognized it before she understood how. It took her 2 more seconds to place it, because she had not expected to hear it here, in this corridor, before sunrise. Doran. Ivy pushed herself upright and swung her legs off the cot, every muscle protesting, and reached the door before she had fully decided to open it. The corridor held all 4 of them. Evander stood closest to the door. Doran stood at the far end, and despite the fact that he was not a small man, not physically, not in rank, not in the weight of the family name he carried, he looked, in the presence of the 3 men between him and the door, remarkably reduced. He had come, apparently, to propose something. Ivy heard the tail end of it as she stepped into the doorway. A private arrangement. Something that serves everyone without requiring formal. He stopped when he saw her. The look on his face was something she filed away without expression. It was not guilt, not precisely. It was the look of a man who had expected to handle a situation before it became one, and had arrived too late to manage it. Ivy, he said, and the warning that used to live in that word had gone somewhere. What replaced it was less certain. I came to talk. I heard, she said. There are arrangements that could be made, he said, his voice finding some of its old steadiness. For the child, quietly, without involving... Her name, Ivy said, is Siren. A beat of silence. Without involving outside parties, Doran finished, as though she hadn't spoken. Evander had not moved, had not spoken. He stood with his back to Ivy and his face toward Doran, and the particular quality of his stillness had changed since the evening before. Last night it had been the stillness of a man choosing patience. This morning it was something else. The stillness of a decision already made, waiting for the appropriate moment to be known. You had your moment, Evander said. In front of the entire council, you made your choice clearly. With respect, Doran began. That was not an invitation to speak, Evander said. And the corridor went very quiet. Doran left, not gracefully. There was nothing graceful about a man retreating from a corridor at dawn with his jaw tight and his pride somewhere on the floor behind him. But he left, which was the only thing that mattered. He turned, pulled his cloak around him with the sharp precision of someone performing composure for an invisible audience, and walked back the way he had come without another word. Ivy watched him go. She had expected to feel something stronger. Triumph, perhaps, or the particular satisfaction of witnessing a consequence finally arrive at the door of someone who had long avoided them. Instead, she felt something quieter and less dramatic. A kind of settling. Like a book being closed on a chapter that had gone on several pages too long. She turned back to the room. Siren was still sleeping. Ivy stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her daughter's small face in the early gray light, and felt the full weight of what the next months would require. She had no pack, no permanent shelter, no income beyond what she had managed to set aside from the work she had taken wherever it was offered, mending, hauling, whatever hands could do when names carried no weight. Siren would need more than that. Siren would need a great deal more. "You're calculating," said a voice beside her. She hadn't heard Evander approach. He moved quietly for a man of his size, not stealthily, simply without the self-announcing heaviness that most large men carried as a matter of habit. "I'm planning," she corrected. "What's the difference?" "Calculating is what you do when you're afraid," she said. "Planning is what you do when you've decided to move forward anyway." He looked at her with that steadiness she was beginning to recognize as simply how he looked at things he considered worth looking at. Not warm, exactly. Not cold. Present. Fully and entirely present, in a way that most people weren't. "You should eat," he said. "You keep telling me what I should do. You keep not doing it." Corvin appeared at the end of the corridor with bread, dried fruit, and something hot in a clay cup that smelled of herbs and black pepper. He set it on the small table inside the room with the efficiency of someone who took genuine satisfaction in logistics and disappeared again before being thanked. Ivy sat and ate. Evander remained in the doorway, facing the corridor, giving her the privacy of not being watched while she was hungry, which she appreciated more than she would have said aloud. When she had finished, she looked up. "You mentioned last night," she said, "that you smelled something in the hall." He turned then, came fully into the room and stood with the low fire behind him, which put his face in partial shadow and made him look briefly like something from the old stories, the kind told in winter, around fires much larger than this one. "Yes," he said. "What did you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive. She was beginning to understand the difference between his silences. Some were deflections. Others were the pauses of a man who chose his words the way a mason chose stones, for fit, for weight, for what they would hold. "There is a bloodline," he said finally, "that most packs believe died out 3 generations ago. A lineage that predates most of the current noble houses. The wolves who carried it were," he paused, "uncommon, in ways that made certain people uncomfortable enough to work hard at erasing them from the record." Ivy said nothing. Something very still had come over her. The scent associated with that bloodline is distinctive, he continued. I was told about it as a child, described it in detail by someone who had known one of them. He looked at her directly. I had never smelled it myself. Not once, in 34 years. Until last night, she said. Until last night. The fire crackled. Seren made a small sound in her sleep, and then went still again. You think I carry that bloodline? Ivy said. It was not quite a question. I don't think, he said. I know. The scent doesn't lie. It can't be imitated and it can't be learned. It's older than any technique. Ivy looked down at her hands. They were steady, which surprised her, because her mind was doing something considerably less steady. She thought of her father, packless, restless, a man who had never explained where he came from and had died before she understood why the question mattered. She thought of the way certain wolves had looked at her over the years, just for a moment, with an expression she had never been able to name. Not recognition exactly, something more like the echo of a memory they couldn't quite place. What does it mean? She asked. Practically, for Seren, for me. It means, he said carefully, that your daughter is not without lineage. She carries something considerably older and more significant than Grey Pack blood. A pause. And it means that the people in that hall last night, had they known what I know, would not have left you on that floor. They would have behaved differently for the wrong reasons, Ivy said. Yes. That's not the same as being safe. No, he agreed. It isn't. She appreciated that he didn't try to make it something it wasn't. He could have offered reassurances. He clearly had the power to back them up. Instead, he simply confirmed what was true, and trusted her to do something with the truth, which was, she was realizing, simply how he operated. I need to leave this place, she said. The council will reconvene this morning. Aldrich will want to manage last night in some way that protects his record rather than my rights. I don't want to be here for that conversation. Where will you go? She hesitated. It was the question she had been circling since before dawn, the one that sat at the center of all the planning. She had nowhere certain. There was a village 2 days east where old Marin lived, where she had spent the last months of her pregnancy. She could go back there. It was small and quiet, and no one there cared much about pack politics. It was also completely unprotected. And now, apparently, she was carrying a bloodline that had once made powerful people feel threatened enough to erase it. I don't know yet, she admitted. Evander looked at her for a long moment. Come to Ashenvale, he said. The name landed in the room with the quiet weight of something significant. Ashenvale, the seat of the High Pack, the oldest continuously held territory in the northern reaches. She had heard it spoken of the way people spoke of mountains or deep water, as a thing that existed on a different scale than the ordinary world. That's your territory, she said. Yes. You're inviting a packless woman and a newborn child to Ashenvale. I'm inviting the last carrier of the Dunmore bloodline, he said, and her daughter. A pause. The packless part is a temporary condition. It can be corrected. Ivy stared at him. You're very calm about this, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. He did not appear to be a man who smiled easily or often, but the edges of it, the suggestion of one, the way the light changes before the sun actually clears the horizon. I have been looking, he said, for a reason to make certain decisions for some time now. He held her gaze. I did not expect the reason to arrive the way it did, but I have learned not to argue with timing. Before Ivy could respond to that, and she had several responses forming, none of them quite adequate. The door at the far end of the corridor opened and Reed appeared, his expression carrying the particular brand of neutral urgency that seemed to be his primary mode of communication. Aldrich is convening early, he said. The hall is filling. Evander's attention moved to Reed with the clean decisiveness of a man who compartmentalized without effort. "Bring the council record," he said. "The full ledger, not the session copy. And find Corvin." "Corvin is already there," Reed said. "He has been there since before sunrise, apparently." "Of course he has," Evander said, with a tone that suggested this was entirely predictable behavior. He turned back to Ivy. "Will you trust me for the next hour?" he asked. It was, she noticed, phrased as a genuine question, not an assumption, not a direction dressed in question's clothing. He was actually asking. She thought about the cold stone floor of the council hall. She thought about the sound of silence when she had asked for help. She thought about Seren's fingers wrapped around her sleeve and the dream of the old forest, and the way her blood had made a decision before her mind had finished considering the options. "For the next hour," she said. "Yes." He nodded once, and then he walked toward the council hall with the particular quality of purpose that Ivy was coming to understand was simply how Evander moved through the world. Not as though he intended to dominate every space he entered, but as though the spaces simply recognized him and arranged themselves accordingly. She lifted Seren carefully from the cot, settled her against her shoulder, and followed. The council hall looked different in the morning. The torches had burned low overnight, and the gray dawn light came through the high, narrow windows in long, pale columns, catching the dust still suspended in the air from the night before. The wine had been cleared from the tables, but the smell of it remained, layered under the sharper scent of cold stone and the accumulated tension of men who had gathered early because they sensed that something needed to be managed before it became unmanageable. Aldrich was already at the head of the chamber. He looked up when Evander walked in, and the expression on his face moved through several stages in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and then the careful settling of a man choosing his strategy mid-step. The hall was perhaps half full. Word had spread, as word always did in places like this, with the particular speed of information that people simultaneously want and fear. Faces turned. Ivy recognized some of them from the night before. The same wolves who had watched her slide down that column and decided the floor was more interesting. She kept her eyes forward, and Seren close. Evander did not go to the visitor's position. He walked to the center of the floor, the same center where Ivy had stood alone the previous evening, and stopped there with the complete ease of a man who understood that all rooms, ultimately, belonged to whoever was willing to stand in the middle of them. "Counselor Aldrich," he said. "I'll be brief." Aldrich straightened. "Alpha King, we were not informed you would be attending a formal session." "I'm not attending your session," Evander said. "I'm concluding mine." A murmur moved through the assembled wolves. Aldrich's mouth tightened. Evander turned slightly and extended one hand toward the doorway. Corvin appeared. Where he had been before this moment was unclear, but he materialized with the uncanny timing that appeared to be his defining characteristic, carrying a leather-bound ledger, thick and worn at the corners, sealed with the mark of the High Pack. "The Regional Council of the Northern Reaches operates under the authority of the High Pack," Evander said, addressing the room now rather than just Aldrich. "That authority includes the right of direct record correction when procedural law has been violated at the regional level." He took the ledger from Corvin. "Last night," he continued, "a woman invoked her legal right of recognition before this council. That request was denied on procedural grounds that do not hold under High Pack law, specifically, the requirement that a woman without formal pack standing cannot invoke recognition rights without a witnessing bond." He paused. "That requirement was struck from High Pack Code 11 years ago. This council either failed to update its procedures or chose not to. The silence in the hall had a different quality now than it had the night before. Then it had been the silence of indifference. This was the silence of people understanding, very quickly, that the ground under them was less stable than they had believed. Aldrich opened his mouth. "The child," Evander said, before Aldrich could speak. will be entered into the High Pack record today, under her mother's name, with her bloodline fully documented. He opened the ledger to a page already prepared, already written in the clean, precise hand of someone who had done this before dawn. Her name is Seren. She carries the Dunmore lineage through her mother's line, which makes her documentation a matter of High Pack interest, not merely regional record. The name Dunmore moved through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Ivy watched the ripples, the widened eyes, the exchanged glances, the particular stillness of older wolves who recognized the name and understood its weight. She had not, until this moment, fully believed it. Even after Evander's explanation in the small room, some part of her had held the information at arm's length, the way you hold something fragile when you are not sure of your grip. Hearing it spoken aloud in this hall, in front of these witnesses, in the same space where she had been left on the floor, it became real in a different way. Seren shifted against her shoulder, making a small, disgruntled sound at the noise of the hall, and Ivy pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and breathed. Dunmore. She would learn what that meant. She would learn all of it, every piece of the history that had been stripped from her family before she was old enough to know it existed. But that was for later. That was for a different day, with better light and more sleep, and the particular patience that large truths required. Doran was in the hall. She spotted him near the eastern column. He must have returned after his corridor retreat, drawn back by the same instinct that brings people to scenes they should leave alone. He was watching Evander with an expression that had moved past composure into something rawer. Not anger. Something more honest than anger. The look of a man watching the consequences of his choices take their final shape and understanding too late how differently things might have gone. He looked at Ivy then. She met his gaze evenly. She did not look away, but she did not linger either. She simply looked at him the way you look at a road you once traveled that no longer goes anywhere you need to be. And then she looked away first, not because she had to, but because she was finished. Aldrich signed the record. He did not do it with grace. He did it with the stiff precision of a man complying with something he cannot refuse, which was its own kind of satisfaction. Corvin witnessed it. Reed witnessed it. 2 members of the regional council witnessed it because Evander looked at them, and they found themselves picking up their pens. And then it was done. Seren existed in the record, her bloodline documented, her name written in the ledger of the High Pack in ink that would outlast every person in that room. Ivy exhaled slowly. The walk out of the council hall was nothing like the walk she had attempted the night before. Then she had been trying to leave with dignity intact, alone, and failing at steady. Now she walked beside a man whose presence restructured every room he entered, with her daughter against her shoulder, and the knowledge, solid and new, that she was not without history. She had simply been without the people who knew it. The morning air outside was cold and clean, carrying the smell of pine resin and distant rain. The sky above the old stone buildings of the council grounds was the particular pale blue of early autumn, cloudless, the kind of sky that promises a hard winter coming, but offers clarity in the meantime. Corvin and Reed were already outside, with horses and a covered cart prepared with more blankets and provision than seemed strictly necessary for a short journey, which told Ivy that either Corvin planned for everything, or Evander had given instructions she hadn't heard. She suspected both. Ashenvale is 3 days' ride, Evander said beside her. The cart is more comfortable than it looks. Berta has agreed to travel with you for the first 2 days, until we reach the Midpoint Way station and she returns south. Ivy looked at the preparations, then at him. You arranged all of this before I agreed to come, she said. I arranged the option, he said. You agreed to it. Those are different things. You were very confident I would agree. No, he said, and something in his voice had shifted from the careful precision of the morning into something quieter, less formal. I was hopeful. There's a difference there, too. She looked at him for a moment. The morning light was different from the firelight, less dramatic, more honest, the kind of light that shows things as they actually are, rather than as they might be imagined. In it, he looked tired still, but less guarded than he had in the corridor. As though the formal part of the day had required something from him, and this, standing in the cold air with the business concluded, was something he was permitted to simply be in. At Ashenvale, she said carefully. What would I be? What would Seren be? You would be under high-pack protection, he said. Both of you, formally and completely. A pause. What you become beyond that is not something I would decide for you. But you have thoughts, she said. The suggestion of that almost smile again, the horizon before sunrise version of it. I have thoughts, he agreed. I don't think this is the moment for them. When is the moment? When you've slept more than a few hours, he said. When Seren is a week old and you've had time to find your footing. When you've seen Ashenvale and decided for yourself what you think of it. He held her gaze. I have waited a long time for something I did not know I was waiting for. I can wait a little longer to be certain I say it correctly. Ivy was quiet for a moment. Around them, the council grounds were coming to life with the ordinary sounds of morning. Boots on stone, a cart creaking, voices exchanging the practical business of a day beginning. The world was doing what the world always did, indifferent to the moments happening inside it. She thought about Marin, who had sewn her a dress in the color of faded sand, and pressed both her hands, and told her to go, and not come back without what she deserved. She would send word to Marin. She would send for her, eventually, bring her north to somewhere warm with good light for old eyes that had spent too many years bending over difficult work in poor conditions. She thought about Seren, who would grow up knowing her name was in the record, who would grow up knowing her bloodline, who would not inherit the particular silence that comes from being told, in 100 small ways, that you do not quite exist. She thought about the dream of the old forest, and the dark wolf moving through it as though it belonged, and the way the ground in that dream had felt permanent. Let's go, she said. They traveled north through 3 days of autumn roads, through forests that deepened and darkened as they went, through air that grew colder and cleaner with each morning, through way-station fires and Berta's practical conversation, and Corvin's endless dry commentary on every town they passed, and Reed's comprehensive silence, which Ivy had come to understand was not unfriendliness, but simply a man conserving himself for things he considered worth speaking about. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ashenvale appeared. She had expected something imposing. She had not expected something that felt, in the strangest and most inexplicable way, like arriving somewhere. The great hall received her without ceremony, which she appreciated. The pack members she encountered were curious, but not hostile, their eyes moving to Seren with the particular softness that healthy communities reserved for new lives, regardless of the politics of their arrival. Evander showed her to rooms in the east wing that looked out over a forest so old and dense it absorbed the morning light rather than reflecting it. The rooms were warm, well-furnished, smelling of pine and wood smoke and something else. That dark rain and resin scent that she had first registered in the council hall, and that her blood had apparently decided was home before the rest of her caught up. Is this acceptable? He asked. She looked at the rooms, at the window and the forest beyond it, at the fire already burning, at Seren in her arms, eyes open now, looking at the light with the profound and total concentration of a very new person encountering the world. Yes, she said. It's acceptable. He nodded, turned to leave. Evander. He stopped. Thank you, she said. For the floor, for the corridor, for the record, for all of it. She paused. I don't say that lightly. He turned back, and the morning light of Ashenvale was full and clean on his face, and what she saw in it was not the Alpha King of the council hall, or the careful man in the firelit room, but something underneath both of those things. Something that had been waiting, as he said, for a long time. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. I was exactly where I wanted to be. He left her to the rooms and the fire and the forest light. 3 seasons passed. Seren grew with the particular determination of a child who had decided the world was interesting and intended to investigate all of it. She learned to hold her own head up, then to sit, then to pull herself along the floor of the East Wing with enormous focused effort, while the pack members who passed through found reasons to linger in that corridor longer than strictly necessary. Reed, who spoke to almost no one, could be reliably found making low, patient sounds at Seren during her morning hours, which Corvin documented with visible delight, and Reed denied completely. Ivy learned Ashenvale. She learned its corridors and its rhythms, the way the pack moved through the week, the formal structures and the informal ones beneath them. She spent long hours with the pack historian, a meticulous elderly wolf named Oswin, working through the Dunmore records that had survived, and there were more than she had expected, hidden in the deeper archive in ways that suggested someone had preserved them deliberately against the possibility of eventual retrieval. She learned who she came from. It was not a simple history. The Dunmore wolves had been, as Evander had said, uncommon in ways that unsettled people, instinctively drawn to the broken, the overlooked, the systems that needed correcting. They had been advisors and advocates, and occasionally thorns in the side of leadership that preferred comfort to accuracy. They had made enemies, and they had made the world, in the small ways available to individuals, somewhat better than they found it. Ivy thought she could live with that inheritance. She and Evander moved toward each other the way tides move, gradually, consistently, without drama, shaped by something larger than either of them that did not require force because it had its own direction. He came to the East Wing in the evenings. They talked. About Ashenvale. About the history she was uncovering. About the pack decisions he was navigating. About smaller things, too. The ordinary texture of shared days. He made her laugh occasionally, with a very dry humor that arrived without announcement and was gone before you could fully appreciate it, which made it funnier somehow. He told her his thoughts eventually, when Seren was 3 months old, and the winter had come fully, and the fire in the East Wing was the kind that meant serious business. He said them carefully, as promised, and she listened to all of it before she responded. Her response was yes. The formal bonding was held in Ashenvale's Great Hall at the turning of winter into early spring, witnessed by the full pack, documented in the high pack record beside Seren's entry. It was not a large ceremony. Evander had asked her what she wanted, and she had said something real, and he had understood exactly what that meant. Maren came north for it. She sat in the front row, with the expression of a woman who had sewn a linen dress in the color of faded sand, and had known, with the deep, practical certainty of someone who had lived long enough to recognize the difference between a story ending badly and a story not being finished yet, that this was always where it was going. Doran's formal petition to contest the Dunmore documentation, submitted to the High Pack 2 months after the night of recognition, was reviewed, considered, and denied. The denial was delivered in 3 sentences, which Corvin read aloud with professional neutrality, and then filed without further comment. Doran returned to the Grey Pack, where the story of what had happened in the council hall had arrived long before he did, carried by the particular efficiency of rumor in wolf society, and settled into his life with the somewhat diminished profile of a man who had made a famous miscalculation, and would spend some years being reminded of it in small ways. Aldrich retired from the council before the spring session. His replacement updated the regional procedures to align with High Pack code within the month. Several other women who had been turned away from recognition requests over the previous years received formal notification that their cases would be reviewed. It was not everything. It was not enough. But it was a beginning, which was what beginnings were. Insufficient and necessary in equal measure. On the last night of that first winter, After the bonding ceremony and after Maren had been settled into the warm rooms in the south wing, and after Seren had finally surrendered to sleep with the reluctance of a child who considered rest a personal defeat, Ivy stood at the east window and looked out at the forest. The trees were enormous and dark and old. Their roots went deep enough that the ground above them felt permanent. Snow was falling through them quietly, the way snow falls when there is no wind, and the world has decided to be still for a moment. She felt Evander behind her before she heard him. That particular warmth, that rain and resin scent that her blood had recognized before her mind had caught up, on a cold stone floor, in a hall full of people who had looked away. He stood beside her at the window. They watched the snow fall through the old trees together, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because some things do not require words when the people feeling them are standing in the same place, looking at the same forest, with their whole lives arranged before them, like a landscape finally come clear. This was not the beginning of something. It was the settling into something that had already, in the way of all true things, always been.